As the teacher removes Sarah's school jacket, it is lined with paper and plastic. The class was filled with shock. The children were speechless, their faces showing disbelief and concern. Mary was the only daughter of Mr. Davidson, a successful businessman. When he died, Mary inherited his vast wealth, making her one of the youngest, richest women in the region. She married Harry Williams, a wealthy man himself, and together they became a powerful couple, each busy with their business ventures and rarely spending time at home. Mary and Mr. Williams had a relationship that was more a partnership in business than a true marriage. Both were deeply engrossed in their respective careers, leaving little time for one another. Their days were filled with meetings, deals, and the constant demands of managing their empire. The mansion they called home was grand and opulent, but it often felt empty, a reflection of their disconnected lives. Mr. Williams was so focused on his work that he barely noticed the smaller details of their daily life. He rarely saw the thriftiness in Mary's choices, like rotating her 5 dresses weekly or avoiding expenses at every turn. His world revolved around business, and he assumed Mary was content with their wealthy lifestyle. When Mary gave birth to twins, Sarah and Samuel, her emotions were a whirlwind of joy and anxiety. Holding her babies for the first time, she felt a profound sense of love and responsibility. She promised herself that she would provide the best for them, even if it meant being frugal. The arrival of the twins brought some warmth to their home, a stark contrast to the cold marble floors and high ceilings that characterized the mansion. The birth of Sarah and Samuel briefly bridged the gap between Mary and Mr. Williams, but the demands of their busy lives soon pulled them apart again. Mary found solace in her children, channeling her love and attention into raising them. The mansion, despite its splendor, became a backdrop to a life of meticulous saving and careful planning. Mary's days were consumed with caring for the twins, yet her frugality persisted. She believed in saving every penny, convinced it was the only way to secure their future. Mr. Williams remained absorbed in his work, unaware of the sacrifices Mary made daily. Their home was a sprawling estate, complete with lush gardens, a grand staircase, and rooms filled with antique furniture. Despite its grandeur, there was a palpable sense of isolation. The spacious rooms often echoed with silence, a testament to the lack of family connection. One day, Samuel fell gravely ill while Harry was away on business. Mary, convinced of the power of her herbal remedies, gave Samuel herbs to drink, believing they would cure him. She hesitated to take him to the hospital, seeing it as an unnecessary expense. However, as Samuel's condition worsened, Mary received devastating news. Mr. Williams had died in a plane crash. Overwhelmed with grief, Mary was heartbroken, struggling to process the loss of her husband and the declining health of her son. Despite her immense sorrow, the passing of Mr. Williams meant that Mary inherited even more wealth, making her the richest woman in the region. However, her obsession with not spending money grew even more severe. She became increasingly frugal, to the point of self-deprivation. Mary decided that the mansion was too large and costly to maintain. Viewing it as an unnecessary extravagance, she fired the maids and moved into a small, modest house. The spacious, grand estate that once echoed with the sounds of her children's laughter was now replaced by a humble abode, reflecting her intense aversion to spending money. In her new home, Mary continued her extreme frugality. She avoided using hot water, even in the coldest months, and refused to buy new clothes, opting instead to wear cheap dresses until they ripped at the seams, then patch and mend her old ones. Her new house was sparsely furnished, with only the bare essentials. Mary collected coupons for food and sought out the cheapest options available, often compromising on quality. The loss of Samuel, who eventually succumbed to his illness due to the lack of timely medical intervention, only deepened Mary's commitment to her miserly ways. The doctor's words haunted her. Samuel could have survived if he had been taken to the hospital in time and received proper nutrition. But Mary, blinded by her fear of spending money, could not bring herself to act. Mary's new home became a symbol of her isolation and the consequences of her obsession. It was a constant reminder of the wealth she possessed but refused to enjoy. The lavish life she could have led was overshadowed by her relentless drive to save money at all costs, leaving her alone and disconnected from the world around her. She became even more stingy despite her growing empire that generated significant income every day. Newspapers reported that she lived in broken-down apartments, all while being a millionaire many times over. She didn't care what the media wrote about her. She continued her frugal lifestyle, using cold water in the middle of winter to save money. Her daughter, Sarah, would often ask, "Mum, why do we use cold water when at school the restrooms have hot water?" Mary would give her a partial explanation, saying, "We shouldn't waste money, Sarah. Money is meant to be saved for when it's desperately needed. That's why, do." Sarah's wardrobe was limited to a few clothes, most of which came from thrift shops. Mary would tell her, "These are good quality clothes, not like what they make these days." "I know you will love this dress," she will tell her daughter. Despite their wealth, Mary and Sarah's lives were characterized by extreme frugality. Mary remained unwavering in her belief that saving money was more important than enjoying the comforts her wealth could afford. The loss of Samuel and her obsession with saving money had driven her to extreme lengths, impacting her relationship with Sarah and shaping their daily lives in ways that left Sarah questioning her mother's choices. Years passed, and Mary's relationship with her daughter Sarah grew strained. As Sarah grew up, Mary continued her extreme frugality, sewing and mending Sarah's clothes, including her underwear, as she got older. Sarah thought this was normal, but she couldn't help but notice the other kids at school with their new, brightly colored school bags and pristine uniforms. She attended a government-free school, and sometimes the other children humiliated her for her worn-out clothes and patched-up shoes. Lunchtime was always difficult for Sarah. Her lunchbox usually contained a simple sandwich and a piece of fruit, while the other children had more varied and appealing meals. She would watch them with envy, feeling the sting of her mother's stinginess. The neighbors couldn't believe that the daughter of such a wealthy woman would be sent to a government-free school and live in such frugal conditions. One cold winter day, Sarah fainted in the middle of class. Her teacher, Miss Temb, rushed to her side. "Let's remove her jacket and give her some space," she demanded. "She needs a." As the teacher removed Sarah's school jacket, it is lined with paper and plastic. The class was filled with shock. The children were speechless, their faces showing disbelief and concern. The realization that Sarah was being sent to school with such inadequate clothing in the freezing winter left the entire class speechless. The school principal, Miss Stingiest, immediately called Mary, demanding an explanation. When Mary arrived at the school, she showed little interest in the situation and fought with everyone to mind their own business. She was adamant about not spending money on anything unnecessary. "You should all mind your business," Mary snapped. "There's no need to make a fuss about this. We shouldn't waste money on things we don't need." And she takes her daughter's hand and says, "Come, Sarah, let's go home." The principal and teachers were appalled by Mary's lack of concern for her daughter's well-being. They tried to reason with her, explaining that proper clothing and nutrition were essential for Sarah's health and education. But Mary remained stubborn, unwilling to spend a single cent more than she deemed necessary. The incident left a lasting impact on Sarah. She struggled with feelings of shame and inadequacy, knowing that her mother's obsession with saving money was affecting her well-being. The other children continued to tease her, but Sarah's resilience grew stronger with each passing day. Despite the challenges, Sarah remained determined to succeed. She focused on her studies, hoping that one day she could break free from her mother's frugality and live a life where she didn't have to worry about every penny. As Sarah grew up, resentment towards her mother Mary began to fester. The constant humiliation and frugality imposed by Mary became a source of deep-seated anger. People in the streets would gossip about Sarah, wondering why Mary treated her daughter so poorly. "I wonder why Mary would treat her daughter like this," they would murmur. "Look how she's begging for leftovers when her mother can afford everything. She's a very stingy woman," another would say. Despite the whispers and judgments from the community, Mary remained unchanged. Her obsession with saving money was relentless. She would demand repayment from anyone who borrowed from her, no matter how small the amount. This often left Sarah embarrassed, as she had to witness her mother's penny-pinching behavior. Mary became known as the most stingy woman in the world, a title she wore with stubborn pride. Sarah, determined to escape the life her mother had imposed on her, worked hard in school. She focused on her studies, aiming to achieve the highest grades possible. Her goal was clear: to leave home and start a new life without the shadow of her mother's frugality hanging over her. When Sarah finally finished school and went to university, she threw herself into her studies with a fierce determination. She juggled part-time jobs and long hours of coursework, driven by the desire to break free from her mother's control. The journey was challenging, but Sarah's resolve never wavered. On her graduation day, Sarah didn't invite her mother to the ceremony. She felt embarrassed by how her mother looked, even though Mary owned a huge business empire. The thought of her mother, dressed in her worn-out clothes, standing among the other parents, filled Sarah with dread. Instead, Sarah celebrated her graduation with a few friends she had made at university. However, her anger and resentment had led her to attract the wrong crowd. These friends, sensing her vulnerability and desire to fit in, encouraged her to indulge in reckless behavior. They took advantage of her need for acceptance, leading her down a path that threatened to derail all her hard work. As Sarah navigated the complexities of her newfound freedom, she grappled with the scars left by her mother's actions. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Sarah was determined to carve out a life where she could be free from the past and find her own path to happiness. The road to healing was long, but with time and resilience, Sarah hoped to build a future that honored her dreams and aspirations. As the years passed, Mary grew increasingly depressed, largely due to Sarah's absence. Each time Mary called, Sarah would have an excuse, claiming she was too busy with work. "You don't have to work so hard, Sarah," Mary would plead. "Come work at one of the companies. That way, you won't be too busy to see me." But Sarah remained firm, keeping her distance. She knew that her mother's offer was just a way to manipulate her into working for the company for her benefit, not hers. The caregivers noticed how much Mary missed her daughter and the sadness that clouded her once commanding presence. They could see the longing in her eyes each time she mentioned Sarah. Despite Mary's difficult demeanor, the caregivers had a sense of pity for the old woman, who was now trapped in the world she had created for herself, a world where wealth took precedence over relationships. She longed to see her daughter more often, but Sarah's visits were rare. Even family members didn't visit. When Sarah did visit, it was out of obligation rather than genuine desire. Mary's insistence on control and frugality had driven a wedge between them, and Sarah's life without her mother became more important. One day, Sarah received an urgent call. Her mother was in the hospital. Rushing to the hospital, she found out that Mary had suffered a minor stroke. The doctor explained, "Your mum needs to eat healthy and take things easy." She was lucky this time, but next time she won't be this lucky. Despite the warning, Mary struggled to make significant changes to her lifestyle. As the years continued to pass, her health deteriorated further. She fell ill again and this time required a full-time nurse to care for her. The search for a caregiver proved challenging, as Mary's demanding and rude behavior made it difficult for anyone to stay long. Sarah, grappling with her mixed emotions, knew that her mother's stubbornness and pride had contributed to her decline. The struggle to find a balance between duty and resentment weighed heavily on her, as the shadow of her mother's past actions continued to influence their present. Mary's reputation as a difficult patient spread, and soon no one wanted to work for her. Even relatives refused to step in, citing her unbearable demeanor and low pay. Each time Mary hired a caregiver, she would give them a probation period of 3 months. Often, the caregivers would leave before the probation ended, overwhelmed by her demanding and rude behavior. If they managed to stay for the full 3 months, however, none of them lasted more than 3 months. Mary would fire them to avoid the risk of being sued for dismissal without reason. Sarah kept a list of caregivers on standby, knowing that finding someone who could endure her mother's behavior was a daunting task. Despite Mary's notorious reputation, there were always a few who were willing to give it a try, hopeful they might succeed where others had failed. One evening, 2 caregivers, Linda and Joyce, sat in the break room, sharing stories about their experiences with Mary. "Can you believe this woman?" Linda said, shaking her head. "She actually made me bring my own lunch and water for tea. I mean, who does that? It's like she enjoys making our lives miserable." Linda sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I don't know how much longer I can take this. She's constantly criticizing everything I do. If I sweep the floor, she complains that I'm too loud. If I dust the shelves, she says I'm too slow. You think that's bad?" Joyce replied, a smirk on her face. "I once had to sew a button on her dress because she refused to buy a new one. She actually gave me a needle and thread and stood there watching me do it. Talk about awkwardness." The 2 women laughed, finding some solace in sharing their frustrations. But deep down, They both knew that working for Mary was taking a toll on their spirits. Sarah received the call she had been dreading. Linda had quit, unable to handle Mary's behavior any longer. Frustrated, Sarah crossed Linda's name off the list and called the next nurse, hoping this one would last longer. The cycle continued, with each new caregiver coming in with hope and leaving with exhaustion. Finding someone willing to care for Mary became increasingly difficult, as word of her behavior spread further. Despite the challenges, Sarah remained determined to ensure her mother received the care she needed. She grappled with the reality of her mother's stubbornness and the impact it had on their lives. Mary's old age brought new complications. She continued to avoid eating healthy, and her complaints about everything made life difficult for the caregivers. Word of Mary's unpleasant demeanor spread throughout the town. People knew her as the stingiest woman and now, the most difficult patient. The nurses complained about the meager salary Mary offered and the unbearable working conditions. On one of her rare visits, Sarah sat beside her mother's bed, feeling a mix of guilt and relief. "Mother, you need to be more kind to the nurses," she gently advised. "They're here to help you." Mary's eyes flashed with stubbornness. "I don't need anyone's help. I can manage on my own," she retorted, though her frail body said otherwise. Sarah would sometimes call her mother rather than visiting. Each call was filled with tension, as Mary's advanced age only worsened her obstinate and critical nature. Despite knowing she needed help, Mary remained stubborn. She often asked Sarah to check with her accountant to ensure money was being paid into her accounts. Her obsession with money persisted, overshadowing her health concerns. One day, Mary's lawyer suggested that she let Sarah take over the business since she was no longer capable of managing it herself. Mary was unhappy with the suggestion. "Why don't we build a money safe in my bedroom instead?" she proposed. "We can move some of the money to the safe. That way, I can keep an eye on it." The lawyers exchanged concerned glances. "Mrs. Williams, even if we do that, the safe will not be able to hold all that money, and it won't be safe for you," one of the lawyers gently advised. "It's best if Sarah takes over. She can manage the business and ensure everything runs smoothly." Mary's reluctance to relinquish control was evident, but deep down, she knew the lawyers were right. Her health was deteriorating, and she needed to focus on her well-being. However, the idea of giving up control over her wealth and empire was unbearable. As the days passed, Mary became more isolated and stubborn. The caregivers continued to rotate in and out, unable to handle her demanding behavior. Sarah, caught between her sense of duty and the desire to distance herself, struggled with the reality of her mother's condition. As Sarah left, she couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness. The once powerful and wealthy Mary Williams was now a shell of her former self, isolated and lonely. The tables had turned, and the life Mary had meticulously crafted around saving money had left her with nothing but her stubborn pride and the cold reality of her declining health. As Mary lay in bed, her health deteriorating and the days growing colder, she herself deep in thought. The silence of the room was overwhelming, and she could no longer ignore the weight of her reflections. The same wealth that had once brought her a sense of security now seemed meaningless, as she realized the emotional cost it had inflicted on her and her family. Her mind wandered back to the countless times she had prioritized saving money over everything else. She saw the faces of the caregivers she had driven away, the friends she had pushed aside, and most painfully, the daughter she had estranged. She could vividly recall Sarah's tearful eyes and the silent resentment that had grown over the years. The love of money and her stinginess had created an insurmountable chasm between them. A wave of guilt washed over Mary as she thought about Samuel, her precious son whose life had been cut short because of her refusal to spend money on proper medical care. She had convinced herself that she was doing the right thing, saving for a rainy day, but now she realized that her obsession had cost her dearly. No amount of money could heal the pain or undo the damage caused by her actions. As Mary lay there, she felt a heavy weight pressing on her heart. She stared at the ceiling, tears streaming down her face. She realized that the same wealth she had hoarded could not mend her broken relationships. The realization hit her hard. Money could not buy the love and forgiveness she so desperately needed. The emotional impact of this revelation was profound, leaving her feeling helpless and remorseful. Replaying memories of Sarah's childhood and the times they shared before money and obsession had driven them apart. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized how much she had pushed Sarah away with her frugality and stubbornness. Perhaps I was wrong, she whispered to herself, the words echoing in the empty room. No amount of money can heal me or mend my relationship with Sarah. The realization was both painful and liberating. Mary finally understood that her wealth could not buy her the love and connection she so desperately craved. She called for the nurse, her voice trembling with emotion. Please, call Sarah. Tell her I need to see her. Reluctantly, Sarah agreed to visit her mother. When she arrived, she found Mary looking frail and vulnerable, a stark contrast to the powerful woman she once knew. Mary reached out, taking Sarah's hand in her own. Sarah, I'm so sorry, Mary began, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was doing the right thing by saving for rainy days. It's what my mother taught me, but I see now that I was wrong. My obsession with money drove you away, and it cost me our relationship. Sarah's heart softened as she listened to her mother's heartfelt plea. Tears welled up in her eyes as she felt the weight of her own anger and resentment begin to lift. Mom, I understand. But it wasn't just about the money. You never gave me the chance to be part of your life, to really know you. I forgive you, she whispered, her voice trembling. I know you thought you were doing what was best. But we need to move forward from this. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she listened to her mother's heartfelt apology. Mary nodded, her heart heavy with regret. I know, and I am deeply sorry for neglecting Samuel, for everything. Can you ever forgive me? The weight of the years of resentment began to lift as Sarah looked at her mother, seeing her vulnerability for the first time. I forgive you, Mom, she whispered, her voice shaking. We need to heal, both of us. The two women embraced, their tears mingling as they sought to mend the broken pieces of their relationship. The emotional release was overwhelming, but it also marked the beginning of a healing process for both mother and daughter. Mary decided to seek counseling to help her navigate her feelings of guilt and remorse. She realized that she needed professional help to heal and to understand the impact of her actions. Sarah supported her mother in this decision, recognizing the importance of addressing the past in order to build a better future. As Mary embarked on her journey of self-discovery and healing, she also handed over the reins of the business to Sarah. It was a symbolic gesture, acknowledging that her daughter was capable and deserving of taking over the empire. Mary found solace in knowing that she was not only mending her relationship with Sarah but also entrusting her with a legacy that could be nurtured with love and compassion. The path ahead was still uncertain, but Mary and Sarah faced it together, ready to rebuild their bond and create a future where love and understanding took precedence over wealth and material possessions. In a few weeks, Mary passed away. Her funeral was simple, just as she would have wanted. Her voice echoed in the memories of those who knew her, always saying, money shouldn't be wasted. The journey of forgiveness and healing between her and Sarah had only just begun, but it was a step towards mending the broken pieces of their relationship. The news of Mary's death spread quickly. The newspapers carried the headline, "The most stingy woman in the world has passed on, leaving behind a worth of $3.5 billion she never got to enjoy." The articles detailed Mary's frugality and her massive fortune, a stark contrast that left many puzzled. Mary left behind a daughter, Sarah, who now stood at a crossroads. The legacy of wealth and frugality loomed large, and people wondered what path Sarah would choose. Would she follow in her mother's footsteps, or would she forge a new path that embraced the values of love and compassion over material wealth? Sarah's thoughts were a mix of sorrow and hope as she stood by her mother's graveside. The relationship they had begun to rebuild was cut short, but she carried the lessons and the bond they had rekindled in her heart. The choices she made moving forward would shape her future and the legacy she would leave behind. As Sarah contemplated the immense responsibility of managing the business and the wealth her mother left, she knew she needed to find a balance. She wanted to honor her mother's memory by making thoughtful decisions, but she also yearned to create a life filled with meaningful connections and joy. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Sarah faced it with determination. She was ready to embrace the challenge, guided by the hope of a brighter future where love and understanding took precedence over wealth and material possessions. The story emphasizes the power of forgiveness and the possibility of healing even the most fractured relationships. Genuine connections and relationships are far more valuable than material wealth. When you are too obsessed with saving money, this may ultimately lead to strained relationships, isolation, and missed opportunities for genuine happiness. A fiercely guarded wealth cannot buy love, connection, or health. True legacy is not defined by the amount of money one leaves behind, but by the positive impact one has on the lives of others. Thank you for watching Granny G Stories. Please subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt and engaging stories. Leave your suggestions and comments below. What do you think Sarah should do? Should she follow her mother's footsteps or forge a new path? We'd love to hear your thoughts.